here on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. It will be here in Galilee that Jesus will lay the groundwork for the importance of the Eucharist, the how and the why of this sacrament, which is at the heart of all the other sacraments and at the heart of the Church herself.
When we talk about the Eucharist, we usually think about the Last Supper, and rightly so. It was the culmination, the climax of Jesus' ministry to institute the Eucharist at that Last Supper, where He gave us His body and blood as our food and drink. Now, that culminating moment was prepared for by Jesus' ministry. And if we go all the way back to the Galilean ministry of Jesus, we see that He's laying a foundation for that very important event, His deed of handing over the Eucharist, His body and blood. Up the hill here, there is a church called Tavga. And at that church, there's an altar, and under that altar, there's a rock. And it is at that rock that Jesus is going to perform a great sign where He multiplies the loaves and the fishes. In Mark chapter 6, verse 32, Jesus comes up here with a boat with His disciples. He's looking for a lonely place, away from the cities. And we're told by John in John chapter 6, who also recounts this event, that it was the time for the Passover. So Jesus, at the time of the Passover, wants to gather with His disciples. But as He gathers here and comes here, the crowds begin to gather. And Jesus, rather than being irritated or annoyed that the crowds keep following Him, He has compassion. Mark tells us in Mark chapter 6 that they were like sheep without a shepherd. And Jesus wants to be the good shepherd. And so Jesus is teaching all day, and the people are hungry. And at the end of the day, Jesus tells His disciples, "You give them something to eat." And Philip says, "What? Even if we had 200 denarii worth of bread, that would not be enough to feed all these people. That would just be a little bit." But Jesus says, "Have the crowds gather and sit down. You're going to give them something to eat." And then we're told in John chapter 6 that Andrew finds a boy who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. "But what is that amongst so many?" Andrew asks. "It's nothing." And yet, if they give Jesus all that they have, if we give Jesus all that we have, it will always be enough, because Jesus can take the little that we give Him and He can bless it and multiply it. And that's exactly what happens. Jesus takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. He takes it, He blesses it, He breaks it, and then He gives it to the apostles to distribute amongst the crowds. And so as the apostles begin to distribute the bread and the fish, there's a multiplication. There's enough. In fact, there's more than enough. There's plenty. In fact, Jesus tells them to not leave anything behind, and they gather up 12 baskets left of the fragments of bread and fish left over. 12 baskets, which of course is a symbolic number that represents the 12 tribes of Israel. And then of course, this is the time of the Passover. And so we're told that it's the green grass in the Gospel of Mark, which tells us it's spring. It's the time of the Exodus, because the grass would be dried out in the summer. And then we're told that Jesus has them sit in 50s and 100s, because Moses is told by Jethro, his father-in-law, in Exodus 18, to divide the group of Israel, to gather them up in groups of 50s, 100s, and 1000s. And so the idea is that this is a new Exodus. As they remember the old Passover, Jesus is about to anticipate His ultimate Passover, and it will be a year later, at the final Passover of Jesus' life, at the Last Supper, that Jesus will take the bread and the wine and bless it, break it, give it to His disciples and say, "This is my blood of the new covenant. This is my body broken for you." And so here we are a year out in Galilee, and Jesus is anticipating the mystery of the Eucharist, and He's showing that He's about to bring a new Exodus and a new miracle with the bread, a new manna, a new bread from heaven, as we're going to see Him describe it in just a little bit. And today, as we reflect on the miracle of the bread that is anticipated by this, that is the Mass and the Eucharist, we know that the miracle happens again at the hands of the apostles. In other words, at the hands of those of apostolic orders, the priests, who take and bless and break in the name of Jesus. They make that miracle of the bread happen again when Jesus becomes present in the Eucharist at every Mass. So Jesus has the miracle happen at the hand of the apostles back here 2,000 years ago, because He intends for the apostles to be the ones who administer this miracle throughout church history. Those who are of apostolic succession are able to do that miracle. So here we see the beginning of Jesus' important Eucharistic teaching in Galilee.